welcome back to Shota Aizawa Podfics. Today we're going to be reading July 20th by 2120_Rivercrest. This is a one-shot, roughly 5,000 words, 6,000 words, and yeah, here's the summary. Oh, and this is read by Izuku Midoriya. Oh my god. Yeah, let's get started. Summary. July 20th, the day Izuku was diagnosed quirkless. That happened 11 years ago. So what could go wrong today? Absolutely everything, of course. AKA, a self-indulgent fic about Izuku's anxieties and Dadzawa. Izuku sighed as he looked at his calendar. July 20th, the day he was diagnosed quirkless. Of course, that was 11 years ago. Izuku went to UA, had great friends. Hell, even All Might was his mentor. He had a quirk now. He wasn't useless or worthless. There was always a voice in the back of his head that argued he was worthless and a stupid Deku, but it was easier to not listen to the voice lately. Still, the day didn't bring back fond memories. It was the day his world had come crashing down. After all, it was the day that bullying started, that his dreams had started to look like a fantasy. He still thought about that day sometimes, but today was especially riddled with memories. Izuku shook the thoughts out of his head. No, today was a completely normal day. He was going to go to school and hang out with his friends. Everything was going to be fine. With renewed vigor, oh my god, I can't read today. With renewed vigor, he got ready for the day, and by the time he went downstairs, he had mostly forgotten about his anniversary. "Hey, Deku," Uraraka called out, a bright smile on her face. With an equally bright smile, Izuku greeted her back and sat next to her at the table. Ida was on his left, gesturing wildly to Todoroki. "Are you—" Uraraka cut herself off when she looked at Izuku. She broke into a smile. "What are you doing in your school uniform, silly?" "Huh?" Izuku intelligently replied. She smiled playfully. "It's our day off today. We just finished our midterms, remember?" Right, of course. Izuku forgot about that since he was so caught up about his anniversary. He barely started the day, and he was already making a fool out of himself. He sheepishly laughed. "I guess I forgot. But hey, it's a nice surprise. What are you doing today?" "Most of us are going to the new arcade around the corner. Wanna come?" "Sure," he answered quickly, anything to get his mind off of what happened 11 years ago. Besides, he had never gone to an arcade with friends before. "Great," she cheered, whipping out her phone. "I'll let everyone know." Soon enough, everyone's phone pinged with the message Uraraka sent, no doubt in the group chat. Why anyone thought a group chat was a good idea was beyond Izuku. Once everyone finished their breakfast, they headed out to the arcade with Aizawa as a chaperone. He had brought the atrocity that was his yellow sleeping bag, of course. As soon as they entered the arcade, everyone split into groups. The two main groups were the Baku Squad and Deku Squad, with some addition to both. Once the groups were decided, Aizawa said, "Don't cause any trouble," before zipping up his sleeping bag. The arcade was bigger than most, since there were two very large floors filled with games. The Baku Squad made their way over to Dance Dance Revolution, no doubt Ashido's idea, while the Deku Squad went towards a racing game. "I call dibs first," Uraraka called out. "Who wants to challenge me?" Asui stepped up. "I'll give it a try, Giro." They mounted the motor vehicles, and the race started. Uraraka had a great head start, but Asui was quickly catching up to her. Then, in the final stretch, Asui got a power-up and sped past Uraraka. "Hey, no fair," she whined, melting onto the motorcycle. I believe Asui went fair and square," Ida pointed out. "Good game," Asui consoled. "I'm only this good because my siblings constantly challenge me to video game matches." Uraraka sat up, all traces of defeat gone from her face. "All right, who's going to go up against Asui?" "How about Midoriya?" Yaoyorozu suggested. "I like it," Hagakure replied. The two green forces against each other. Uraraka pulled Izuku towards the other motorcycle, but he was reluctant to try it. "I'm not very good at this." "Just try it," Asui encouraged. "It'll be fun." Izuku relented after a few more of his classmates insisted. He mounted the motorcycle, already feeling a little unsteady. The numbers on the screen counted down and the race began. Both players shot forward in a burst of speed and were fairly even for a few moments. Then they had to make a turn. Asui completed it, no problem, but Izuku couldn't turn fast enough and ended up crashing into the wall. Izuku quickly corrected himself and got back in the race, but it kept happening. He would either turn too much or not enough. Plus, activating the power-up confused him too. His classmates tried giving him tips, but it just made him feel worse. Of course they would know how to play, and he didn't. He was useless after all. The race ended quickly with Asui as the victor. Izuku deflated on the inside. Worthless, stupid, couldn't even win one game. Nice try, Kuro, Asui said, holding out her hand to shake. It gets easier the more you play. Yeah, the controllers are usually shitty, Hagakure agreed. Izuku shook Asui's hand and got off the bike. He still felt bad for not winning the game, but he had never played it before. He had no reason to, since there was no one he would have played it with. After the racing game, they went through several different games, and Izuku slowly started to feel better. Sure, he still lost some games, and the voice in the back of his head was there, but it wasn't bad at all. He was surrounded by friends, and that was more than he could have asked for a year ago. They had spent most of the afternoon at the arcade, and at about 3, everyone had spent their money and gotten the prizes that they wanted. Izuku had gotten an All Might figurine, because how could he not? The Deku squad made their way towards the entrance, where they were to meet Aizawa at the end of the day. On their way there, Izuku excused himself to go to the bathroom and said he would meet them there. As Izuku did his business, he reflected on the day. Honestly, it was the best 20th of July he's ever had. He got to have some fun with his friends and didn't need to stress out about any villains. He even got an All Might figurine. All in all, not a bad day. As Izuku was drying his hands, the door opened and 2 other teenagers walked in. Izuku didn't think much of them until one of them spoke. No way, Deku! He had to speak too soon, didn't he? He looked at the 2 teenagers and paled. It was Tsubasa and Daiki, 2 of his bullies from middle school that usually followed Bakugo around. Of course, he had to run into them today, didn't he? Holy shit, it is, Daiki replied. The surprise morphed into smugness as he stepped forward. Damn, didn't expect you to get into UA. How'd you do it? What do you mean? Izuku asked, internally cursing himself for the stuttering. Come on, a quirkless loser like you couldn't have gotten in the regular way, Tsubasi said, slowly stalking towards him, extending his wings to make himself look bigger. You cheated, didn't you? What'd you do, get fucked by one of the teachers? Izuku's eyes widened. No! Being called a worthless loser was one thing, because it was true, but accusing him and the teachers of doing something so foul, that was not okay. Daiki continued, as if he didn't hear Izuku. Nah, no way, man. No one would ever want him. He sneered. Tsubasa laughed and nodded. Yeah, you're right. Maybe the answer is in here. Before Izuku could blink, Tsubasa snatched his yellow backpack out of his grip. Izuku tried to get it back, but Daiki held him back. He briefly thought about using his quirk, but the thought was quickly shot down. No, that was illegal. A part of him said he deserved this for being quirkless. Tsubasa spilled his contents all over the floor, and once the backpack was empty, he tossed it to the ground. He scanned the pile of items until a certain figurine caught his eye. Don't tell me you're still a fan of him, he snickered, holding up the All Might figurine. How could someone like you ever even think about being like him? He was right. How could he ever hope to be the symbol of peace All Might wanted him to be? Izuku was a hopeless cause that would eventually disappoint him. Give that back, Izuku cried, struggling against Daiki. Even without his quirk, Izuku still had quite a bit of strength. Daiki was struggling to hold him back, so he resorted to using his quirk. Quicksand. Daiki made the ground underneath Izuku into quicksand-like material, causing Izuku to stop his struggling. He knew from first-hand experience how bad it was to get trapped in quicksand. That's better, Tsubasa commented, still observing the All Might figurine. You know, this is nice. I think I'll keep this for myself. You can't, Izuku yelled. I earned that. Daiki scoffed. Yeah, right. I bet you cheated to get that, just like UA. I didn't cheat, Izuku insisted, still trying to reach for the figurine without sinking himself further into the quicksand. It was almost up to his knees. Come on, Deku, no one likes a liar, Tsubasa taunted, dangling the finger out of his reach. Tell us how you got in. Who'd you fuck? Anger bloomed within Izuku's chest. I didn't! He could feel the tears at the edges of his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He couldn't cry here. Not now. Crying always seemed to make the bullying worse. Aw, come on, Daiki jeered. That's the only thing you'll ever be good for, and even then, it's a long shot. Stop! I said I didn't! Tsubasa's smirk grew. But we all know. Just stop! Izuku screamed, blindly swinging his hand for the All Might figurine again. In his anger, Izuku didn't realize he had accidentally activated One for All. It wasn't much, but it was enough power to send his two bullies flying into the bathroom wall. Not much damage was done, except for maybe a concussion and a bump on the back of their heads. But that didn't matter. They were pissed. Tsubasa got up from the floor and stalked his way over to Izuku. You'll fucking pay for that. Then he reared his fist back and punched Izuku right in the stomach. He sucked in a breath and hunched over, but didn't fall over. He had taken harder hits than that. It still hurt, though. Fucking Deku, Daiki cursed, standing up. He gathered all of Izuku's belongings and tossed them into the toilet with a smirk. Tsubasa knelt down so Izuku could see his face. Once a useless Deku, always a useless Deku. Both of them cackled before leaving the bathroom, smug smirks on their face. Izuku sucked in a few shaky breaths as a few tears ran down his cheeks. Scratch that, today was a really bad day. Once Daiki was far enough, his quirk faded away, and Izuku was able to move about freely. He went to the toilet and gathered up all his things in a bunch of paper towels. Luckily, Daiki hadn't thrown his backpack in the toilet, so he could hide his soaked belongings well enough. He always knew how to hide these types of things. He couldn't worry his mother. He would just be a burden. He packed up his things in a haze, desperately trying to ignore the voice in the back of his head, which was quickly coming to the forefront of his mind. Coward, worthless, couldn't even win a fight. What kind of hero was he? Izuku took a few shaky breaths to calm himself down and dry his tears. He suddenly felt very drained and just wanted to go home and sleep. The door opened, and Izuku whipped around to see who it was. He hoped they didn't come back for more. Luckily, it was just Todoroki standing at the door, looking concerned. Midoriya, are you all right? Izuku nodded and put on his very practiced smile. I'm fine, Todoroki. Just ran into some old friends. He furrowed his eyebrows and scanned Izuku up and down. Are you sure you're okay? Yes, I promise. He lied easily. Todoroki looked like he wanted to say something else, but Izuku beat him to it. We'd better get going. The others are waiting for us. Todoroki hesitated before saying, okay. They walked towards the entrance in awkward silence, but thankfully it wasn't a long walk. Once they met up with the rest of the group, his friends filled in the silence. Deku! Uraraka called out. He desperately held down his flinch at the name. Where were you? We were starting to get worried. And of course he worried them. He was no good, was he? Sorry, he apologized. I met up with some old friends and just lost track of time. Everyone seemed to buy his lie more or less, and Izuku didn't see Bakugo's friend. He couldn't stand to look at him. What he did see was the way Aizawa narrowed his eyes. Crap, was he that bad at lying? Was he going to find out he was quirkless? But that only lasted for a moment, as soon as Izuku saw it. Aizawa's expression went back to neutral, and he guided everyone back to campus. On the way back, everyone was talking about their experience in the arcade, probably about the prizes they were able to get with their tickets. Izuku wasn't sure. He wasn't entirely listening. He was more focused on not breaking down in the middle of the street. Yeah, Midoriya. Izuku jumped at his name, and he looked up. Yeah? You okay? Uraraka asked. We called you 3 times. He waved it off like he always did. I'm fine. Sorry, I just got distracted. She still looked concerned, and Izuku couldn't have that. Couldn't have them finding out he was quirkless. What would they think? What did you want to ask me? He said, redirecting the conversation. Uraraka gave him an odd look, knowing exactly what he was doing, but answered his question anyway. We just wanted to show everyone the All Might figurine you got at the arcade. Crap, Tsubasa had taken it. He needed to think of something quick. I gave it to one of my friends, he lied. He's also a big All Might fan, but he wasn't able to get the figurine, and I felt bad, so I gave it to him. Wow, he scared himself sometimes with how well he lied. Aw, Midoriya, you're too nice. Ashido cooed. He's like a human angel or something, Kaminari added. Then he looked over to Bakugo, unlike someone. Fuck off, Pikachu. Soon the conversation veered away from Izuku, and he internally sighed in relief. He usually loves to talk with his friends, but he couldn't bring himself to do it today. He just didn't have the energy. And honestly, did he deserve it? These were good people with amazing quirks, and who were definitely going to be heroes. And what was he? Just a quirkless loser. Time almost seemed to skip, and Izuku soon found himself in front of the dorms. When had they gotten here so fast? He looked around and saw a few people giving him worried looks. He quickly shook himself out of his thoughts and made his way to his room. He really needed to be alone right now. Except that seemed to make it worse. The longer he spent his time in loneliness and silence, the more he got consumed by his thoughts. He couldn't do anything right. He couldn't spend time with his friends or be alone correctly. He was just so fucked up. He needed a distraction, badly. He decided to text in the group chat to see if anyone wanted to spar with him. It would be perfect. No talking, just a distraction that was also productive. Most of the people opted out of the training, saying they had the day off for a reason, but Todoroki and Ida agreed to train with him. They decided to meet at the gym to do some basic quirk training, and wasn't that ironic? 15 minutes later, the three of them found themselves in the gym, preparing for their first spar. It was Ida versus Todoroki first. Izuku eagerly dove into his analysis of their quirks as a welcome distraction from the horrible day he's had. Unlike the sports festival, Ida did not rush directly at Todoroki this time. Ida waited for Todoroki to make the first move in order to avoid getting his engines iced over. However, that was his mistake, since Todoroki covered the entire floor with ice. Ida didn't have enough control, and ultimately, Todoroki won. I commend you on your clever use of your quirk, Ida complimented. A much different approach than last time. Todoroki simply nodded as thanks before Izuku stepped up to the mat, firing up full cowling at 5%. Wasn't that pathetic? He could only use 5% of a quirk that wasn't even his. Ida called out, "Start!" And the match began. Todoroki used a similar tactic as before and shot ice towards Izuku. Instead of breaking it away with a flick of his fingers, he dodged to the side and started sprinting at Todoroki. Todoroki used his fire to block Izuku, who had taken a step back. Most of their spar went this way, with neither of them landing a solid hit on each other. Izuku was able to dodge most of Todoroki's attacks, but Todoroki was able to use both sides of his quirk to make sure Izuku didn't get too close. He couldn't even land a hit. How was he going to be the number one hero? Izuku ground his teeth together and tried to ignore his thoughts. He couldn't. He attacked Todoroki again, this time using his quirk to blast some of the fire away. It worked for the most part, but it wasn't strong enough, and some of the fire licked at his sides. Izuku ignored the flames and charged straight for Todoroki. He seemed surprised, but only for a second. He made an icy wall in front of him and dodged out of the way just before Izuku smashed the ice to pieces. He had his chance and screwed that up. Useless, pathetic, Deku. Izuku just needed one hit, and it would all be over. He charged at Todoroki again, but he sent his ice his way, forcing him to change his course. He couldn't fight, and he was going to be a hero. How's that with that? Just one hit. He wasn't useless. He wasn't. He was, and he knew it. Please, just one hit. He was going to be a hero. He had to be. He wasn't. He was just a worthless, quirkless nobody who would never amount to anything else. He was going to fail and disappoint everyone. They would see who he really was because he couldn't fight, and how he couldn't a hero, and he was just and how he couldn't be a hero, and he was just useless, pathetic, worthless, stupid. Izuku was suddenly knocked to the ground, bringing him back to reality. It took him a minute to recognize where he was and what he was doing. Right, the spar. He had to get back up. Izuku went to lift himself off the ground when his right arm lit up in all too familiar pain. He looked, and to his horror, his right arm was an ugly, bruised purple. Broken. Crap. He was so lost in his thoughts that he unconsciously used 100% of One for All. Damn, 2 quirk accidents in a day. It was pathetic. He thought he had control over it, but he didn't. Fucking useless. Izuku managed to stand without using his right arm and scanned the gym. It was a mess. Equipment was strewn everywhere, along with big chunks of ice. Ice? Todoroki! Izuku looked around until he managed to find his friends. They were at the opposite end of the gym, likely blasted back from his quirk. Izuku started to make his way over to them, only to stop short. A medium-sized chunk of ice was stuck in Todoroki's thigh. Blood had already seeped through the fabric and jumping onto the floor. Ida had started putting pressure on the wound, but neither of them tried to remove it in fear of losing more blood. Izuku's blood went cold. He caused this. He got out of control because he was useless, stupid, and his friend had gotten hurt. His breath started coming in quick pants as he slowly backed away. Fuck, he didn't belong here. Not at the top hero school. He couldn't control his quirk. He couldn't control his emotions. He was weak, unfit to be a hero. Before he even realized it, he turned and ran. He needed to get away. He couldn't be here. He didn't deserve to be here. He distantly heard someone shouting his name, but it was drowned out by his thoughts. He ran towards the gates, and for a moment, he was worried that they would shut on him. But they stayed open and allowed Izuku to leave campus. They were meant to keep villains out, not heroes in. So Izuku ran. He ran as far as he could without using his quirk. Who knows who else he'd hurt if he used it. He ran into the sunset, and his legs felt like jelly, and his arms throbbed painfully. He ran until he felt alone enough to finally slow down. He slowed down to a stop, taking in his surroundings. He found himself in front of the building where he asked All Might the most important question of his life. Of course, he ended up here. It was to remind him he was useless. Izuku looked around, and lots of people were looking at him weirdly. He had just sprinted from UA and all the way here. Deciding there were still too many people judging, looking at him, he entered the building, taking the stairs all the way to the roof. It was quieter up there, and the noise from the street faded away into the background. Izuku shook as he sat down, but it wasn't from the cold of the night. The quiet was less oppressive, but it let his thoughts overtake him. Weak, coward, he ran away. He ran away from a problem he caused because he was too stupid to control his quirk. He had enough sense to not sit near the edge of the roof. He already resolved not to leaving his mom alone. But that resolve seemed to be cracking. He was just a burden, useless. With no eyes staring at him, he let a few tears fall and a sob pass his lips. But his body didn't want to stop there. More tears fell, and soon Izuku found himself sobbing earnestly, with no end in sight. Breathing started to get harder, no matter how much air he gulped in. He felt like he was dying. How pathetic. "You're lucky you got here so quickly," Recovery Girl said. "This will heal in no time." Izuku sighed in relief. Ida sighed in relief, and Todoroki nodded at the heroine in thanks. "But I'm more curious about how this happened," Aizawa said. Setting both of them with a look that would get any criminal to talk. "Both of us and Midoriya went to the gym to spar using our quirks," Ida explained. "But during the match between Todoroki and Midoriya, he seemed off. Distracted," Todoroki continued. "He was like that ever since the arcade. I wanted to ask him about it, but didn't want to pry either. During our spar, he got more desperate the longer the fight went on, like he was frustrated or something. Then he suddenly punched using full power. I managed to get an ice ball up in time, but the ice still got stuck in my leg." Aizawa nodded. I noticed he seemed off at the arcade too. Where's Midoriya now?" "That's the thing, Sensei," Ida replied. "He ran away. I called out for him, but he didn't seem to hear me. He looked panicked and scared. I would have ran after him, but I had to get Todoroki to Recovery Girl." "He ran off. Where to?" Then right on cue, Aizawa's phone lit up with a notification. He opened his phone, and his eyebrows rose from his surprise. "He went off campus without permission," he said, barely keeping the surprise and slight panic out of his voice. His students weren't able to do the same. "What? Why would he go off campus?" "I think this goes farther than a sparring match," Aizawa stated. Can you tell me anything else that happened that seemed off about him today?" Todoroki nodded. When I went to get Midoriya from the bathroom, he seemed tense and sad. He might have been crying, but I couldn't tell. If he was, he covered it up really well. Aizawa sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Okay, Ida, ask around and see if anyone else has noticed anything strange from Midoriya for the past couple of days. A few teachers and I are going to search for him. Yes, Sensei, Ida replied before rushing to the dorms. Aizawa turned to start his search when Todoroki called out for him. Sensei? Yes. He's going to be okay, right? Rationally, it was hard to tell. Anything could happen, but he wasn't about to tell that to one of his friends. But he wasn't going to straight up lie about it either. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure he's okay. And he meant it. He failed this class too many times already. He couldn't do it again. With that, he left the room to begin his search. He met up with Present Mike, All Might, Hound Dog, and Ectoplasm at the front gates. They connected their comms and determined their search areas by the time the sun had set. Let us know if you find him, Aizawa reminded everyone before running off to his designated search area. He hopped from rooftop to rooftop, checking alleyways, and even questioned a few people. There was no sign of a student anywhere. He was just finishing up his search when he finally found him. He was on the rooftop of an old office building, not near the edge, thank God, and sitting near the stairwell. He was curled up, and had it not been for his green hair, Aizawa would have missed him. Aizawa briefly spoke into the comms, saying he found him, before dropping onto the roof a few feet away from Izuku. He was curled up, tucking his head into his knees, and one of his arms was pulling at his hair. His breathing was erratic and uneven. A panic attack. Midoriya, Aizawa said, but Izuku made no move to indicate that he heard him. He tried again, but no response. Aizawa moved closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. That got a reaction out of him. Izuku's head shot up, and Aizawa's chest twisted from the sight. He had clearly been crying, and his eyes were still a little distant. Aizawa-sensei, sorry, I'll stop, he mumbled, trying to dry his tears, but he couldn't get his crying under control. Kid, you gotta breathe with me, okay? Aizawa gently grabbed his hand and placed it on his chest. He exaggerated his breath, and Izuku slowly began to calm down. Once his breathing evened out, Aizawa sat down in front of Izuku, trying to figure out the best way to approach this. Sure, he was a teacher, but that didn't mean he was good with kids, especially with a student as emotional as Izuku. He took a deep breath. Todoroki and Ida told me what happened. Izuku flinched back. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It was obviously an accident. That's all right, Aizawa replied, trying his best to make his voice gentle, but he wasn't sure how well he was doing. But I need to know what happened so we can prevent it in the future. I couldn't control it, he answered, looking anywhere but Aizawa's face. I'm stupid and useless, and it got out of control. I'm sorry. I promise it won't happen again. I'm sorry. At that, Aizawa paused. Sure, the problem child might be reckless at times, but stupid? Useless? He was anything but. He needed to know why he thought this way. You're not stupid or useless, Aizawa said. But I am, Izuku insisted, fiddling with the ends of his sleeves. And that's all I'll ever be, because that's what they said. I said, and they're right. Who's they? Izuku looked ready to answer before closing his mouth, seeming to have an internal conflict on whether it was safe to tell Aizawa or not. Please, Midoriya, who are they? Izuku hesitated for a moment, longer before his eyebrows furrowed. Why do you even care? A strange change of topic, but Aizawa answered his question anyway. Because I'm your teacher. It's my job. No, it's not, he answered, and he seemed so sure, and it broke Aizawa's heart. Teachers never care. They never have before. I do care, Aizawa replied. Midoriya, look at me. He needed him to know how sincere he was. Izuku hesitated for a few moments before he finally met Aizawa's eyes, for the first time that night. I do care. It's a teacher's job to care, but I don't care just because I'm a teacher. I've gotten to know you throughout the year, and I know that you are the brightest, kindest person I've ever met. You're so smart, and you're such a good hero. so I need you to know that I do care for you. Tears started to flow down Izuku's cheeks again, and he all but launched himself at his teacher. Aizawa awkwardly hugged him back, and he let him get his crying out. After a few moments of sobbing, Izuku reined himself back and broke the hug. Thanks, Aizawa-sensei. Of course, problem child, but you still haven't answered my question. Who told you that you were useless? Izuku took a deep breath, still hesitating to tell him. Everyone. At least until UA. That didn't make sense. Izuku was a personification of sunshine. Who could hate him? Why? Aizawa asked. At that, Izuku hesitated even more than before. He would open and close his mouth as if he couldn't decide what to say. Kid, I promise that I'm going to help you. I'm not going to judge you for anything. Izuku's breath hitched, and Aizawa thought he was going to cry again, but he managed to keep it in. I'm quirkless. Or at least I was. Quirkless. That made a little sense. Aizawa knew how badly they were treated, but the latest a quirk had ever come in was at 7 years old, and with a powerful quirk like Izuku's, that stigma should have disappeared. Something didn't add up. When did you get your quirk? He asked. The day of the entrance exam? Aizawa had to take a moment to grapple with the fact that a quirk could even come in that late. But once he did, everything started to make sense. Why he didn't seem to understand his quirk the way everyone else did, the way he seemed so nervous all the time despite his powerful quirk, and the way he always deflected any compliments like he didn't deserve them. He would have had to deal with discrimination for almost his entire life, and that left a nasty taste in Aizawa's mouth. Aizawa was also willing to bet that the teachers didn't do anything about the bullying based on Izuku's reaction from before. He must have been silent for too long, because Izuku was starting to deflate and curl in on himself. But it was worse because he looked resigned to it, like he didn't expect Aizawa to believe him at all. That makes sense, actually, he said, surprising Izuku. Really? Yes, really, he repeated. And now that he was able to wrap his head around the idea, he was starting to get pissed. Just because someone was quirkless didn't mean they deserved any of the torment society would have caused them, especially not Izuku. But anger wouldn't do well in this situation. He put the anger in the back to simmer so he could let it loose when the time was right. Right now, he had to comfort his problem child. Midoriya, those things that they said, they aren't true. You know that, right? Izuku curled into himself again. But they're right. Without a quirk, I'm just a dumb, useless nobody. I only got into UA because of my quirk. And, well, Aizawa really couldn't argue that. He had gotten into UA because of his quirk, but that was only because the entrance exam was so biased towards physical quirks. A quirk wasn't all that there was to be a person, and certainly not a hero. Maybe, but that's only because the entrance exam isn't fair, Aizawa said. Izuku still looked like he didn't believe him, and he couldn't have that. Did you know that I was in general education my first year at UA? At that, Izuku's head shot up to meet Aizawa's gaze. Really? But you're such a good hero. Exactly, problem child. A person is so much more than their quirk, no matter what everyone else says. A hero isn't a hero because of their quirk, but because they want to help other people. Sure, you might have gotten into UA because of your quirk, but you stayed because of your heart and your brains. Don't let anyone else tell you differently. Izuku started to cry earnestly again, and this time, Aizawa initiated the hug. Not that anyone else could know that. If it gets this bad again, ever, talk to someone. It doesn't have to be me, but keeping this all inside isn't good, he advised. Izuku nodded into his shoulder. I will. I didn't have anyone to talk to before. and Aizawa wanted to unpack that. He wanted to know just who hurt his student and teach him a lesson. He wanted to do it so badly, but Izuku had just started to calm down and it was getting late. They needed to be getting back. Thank you, Aizawa sensei. Aizawa had a smile into his capture weapon and pat him on the back. You're going to turn out just fine, problem child. Izuku clung to his teacher for a few moments longer, savoring the feeling of kindness, of care from a teacher. It was so much more than he could have ever asked for, and it felt wonderful. And for the first time in 11 years, Izuku didn't hate the 20th of July. Alright everyone, that is the end of July 20th by 2120_Rivercrest. This one was a really good one. Always a fan of the past trauma coming to haunt you. Anyways, have a fantastic day. Let me know your thoughts on this one shot, and as always, drink your water or coffee. Coffee's good too.